The smell of sawdust and steel has been the perfume of my family for 3 generations. Miller and Sons Construction wasn't just a name on the side of a fleet of Ford F-150s. It was our blood type. My grandfather built it from nothing after the war. My father turned it into the premier contractor in Harbor Creek, Ohio, and my older brother Sean was its soul. He was the one destined to carry the torch. I was the outlier, the engineer who took the family knowledge and applied it to designing systems in Cleveland, 2 hours away. I loved the theory, the clean lines on a blueprint. Sean loved the mud, the sweat, and the satisfaction of raising a structure from the earth with his own 2 hands. The last time I saw him, we were standing on the steel skeleton of the new Harbor Creek Tower, the tallest building our company had ever tackled. The November wind whipped around us, but Sean just grinned, his face ruddy and alive. "Look at this, Leo," he'd shouted over the wind, gesturing to the panoramic view of our gritty, proud Rust Belt city. Granddad would have thought he was king of the world up here. He was right. Sean had a way of connecting everything back to our legacy, to the hard work that defined us. He clapped me on the shoulder, his grip as strong and sure as the I-beams beneath our feet. "You should come back, you know. We could use your big brain. Dad's getting tired." "I'll think about it," I'd said, the same non-committal answer I always gave. The truth was, I was proud of them, but I needed my own space, my own identity away from the long shadow of Miller and Sons. That was a Tuesday. The call came on a Friday. I was reviewing schematics for a municipal water system, lost in the precise world of fluid dynamics, when my phone buzzed with my dad's name. I smiled, expecting a weekly check-in. "Leo?" His voice was a choked, hollowed-out version of itself. It was the voice of a man who had just watched his entire world collapse. "Dad? What's wrong?" There was a pause, filled with a sound I couldn't place at first, a raw, ragged sob being violently suppressed. "It's Sean," he finally managed. "There's been an accident at the tower." The world didn't stop. It shattered. The blueprints on my screen blurred into meaningless lines. An accident. The words were clinical, insufficient. Accidents were for other people, for statistics and safety manuals. They weren't for Sean Miller, the most careful, competent man I had ever known. He could walk a high beam in a hurricane and not lose his footing. "What kind of accident?" I asked, my own voice sounding distant, foreign. "He fell, Leo, from the 15th floor. He's gone." Gone, a 3-letter word that erased a lifetime. I don't remember the rest of the conversation. I don't remember hanging up or telling my boss I had to leave. The next thing I knew, I was in my car, driving east on Interstate 90, the gray Ohio sky pressing down on me like a physical weight. The 2-hour drive felt like an eternity and an instant all at once. My mind replayed every memory I had of my brother. Learning to ride a bike, his arms steadying me, him defending me from a bully in middle school, the proud look on his face at my college graduation. As I pulled into my parents' driveway, I saw the cars lining the street. The first person to meet me on the porch wasn't my mother or father. It was my cousin, Rick. He was my dad's nephew, a site manager for the company. He'd always been in Sean's shadow, eager, a little too slick, but family. He wrapped his arms around me in a hug that felt performative, his voice a stage whisper of condolence. "Leo, I'm so sorry. I was right there." I turned around, and he was just gone. His face was a mask of grief, but his eyes were clear, too clear. And in that moment of raw, unthinking shock, a tiny, cold seed of doubt was planted in the ruins of my heart. The days that followed were a suffocating fog of casseroles, hushed condolences, and the averted gazes of people who didn't know what to say. Hushed condolences. Our house, usually filled with the booming laughter of my father and the easy warmth of my mother, became a mausoleum. My dad seemed to have aged a decade overnight, his shoulders permanently stooped under a grief too heavy to bear. My mother moved like a ghost through the rooms, her actions mechanical, her eyes vacant. Sean was the sun of our family's solar system. With him gone, we were just cold planets spinning in the dark. The funeral was a testament to the man he was. The church was packed. Burly construction workers in ill-fitting suits stood shoulder to shoulder with city council members and bank presidents. They all loved Sean. He treated everyone with the same straightforward respect, whether they were pouring concrete or signing a multi-million-dollar check. I stood beside my parents, a stone statue of a son, and listened to the priest talk about God's mysterious ways. All I could feel was a cold, hard rage. There was nothing mysterious about a 15-story fall. It was just brutal physics. Through it all, Rick was a constant, almost suffocating presence. He was the master of ceremonies for our grief, fielding calls, greeting visitors, and always with an arm around my father's shoulder, murmuring words of support. He gave a eulogy that was a masterpiece of sorrowful eloquence, painting a picture of Sean as a hero and a mentor. Sean wasn't just my cousin, he said, his voice cracking perfectly. He was the brother I always wanted. He taught me everything I know about this business, about being a man. Taking over his responsibilities on the tower project, it's the hardest thing I'll ever have to do, but I'll do it for him. We'll finish his masterpiece. The crowd was moved. My mother wept openly, but I watched Rick, and that cold seed of doubt began to sprout. He was playing the part of the grieving protege too well. It was a performance. I saw it in the way his eyes scanned the crowd as he spoke, gauging their reactions. I saw it in the way he seamlessly transitioned from a tearful embrace with my aunt to a firm, businesslike handshake with a project investor. The official story from the police and the OSHA investigator was simple and clean. Tragic accident. Sean had unclipped his safety harness for a moment to navigate a tight space. A gust of wind caught a loose piece of siding, and he lost his balance. A freak occurrence. Case closed. Everyone accepted it. It was easier to believe in a cruel twist of fate than something more sinister. But Sean was a zealot about safety. He was the one who drilled the protocols into every new hire. One mistake is all it takes, he'd say. There are no second chances up here. The idea of him unclipping, even for a second, felt profoundly wrong. It was a betrayal of his own gospel. A few days after the funeral, I was in Sean's office at the company headquarters, a small, cluttered room that smelled of coffee and drywall dust. I was supposed to be looking for his life insurance papers, but I was just sitting in his chair, trying to feel him there. Rick appeared in the doorway. "Tough being in here, huh?" he said, leaning against the frame. "Yeah. Don't worry about a thing, Leo. Your dad's a wreck, but I've got it. The tower, the other projects, I'll handle it. It's what Sean would have wanted." He smiled, a sad, reassuring smile. The bank was a little nervous, but I smoothed things over. Told them Miller and Sons is as strong as ever. Something about his words pricked at me. The bank was a little nervous? Why? Our finances were supposed to be rock solid. "What do you mean the bank was nervous?" I asked, keeping my voice level. Rick's smile tightened for a fraction of a second. Just procedural stuff. A key man on a project of this size passes suddenly. They get jittery. It's all taken care of. He was being evasive. For the first time, my suspicion wasn't just a gut feeling. It had a hook. He was hiding something. He saw the company not as a legacy to be protected, but as a throne to be seized. And he was sitting in it now, wearing a mask of grief while consolidating his power. As he walked away, I looked at the organized chaos of my brother's desk and knew that the answers I needed weren't in the police reports. They were in here. I knew that my engineering mind, the part of me that had always felt so distant from the family business, kicked into gear. Grief was a paralyzing fog, but suspicion was a sharp, focused beam. I needed data. I needed evidence. A hypothesis was forming in the back of my mind, monstrous and unthinkable, but I had to follow it. I told my parents I needed to stay for a few weeks to help sort out Sean's affairs. In reality, I was launching my own quiet investigation. I started at the place where his life ended, the Harbor Creek Tower. The site was operational again, a beehive of activity under Rick's command. He greeted me with a somber nod when I arrived, clad in a hard hat and a borrowed safety vest. "Leo, I don't know if this is a good idea. It might be too hard for you," he said, his voice dripping with faux concern. "I need to see it, Rick," I said flatly. "I need to understand." He couldn't very well refuse. He assigned a young foreman to show me around, but I could feel Rick's eyes on my back. I went straight to the 15th floor. The spot was unmarked, just another section of concrete and rebar against the vast, empty sky. The wind was a constant, mournful whistle. I tried to picture it, Sean, confident and capable, taking that one fatal step. It didn't fit. The foreman, a kid named Jimmy who had revered my brother, looked uneasy. "It was a real freak thing, Mr. Miller," he said. "The wind that day, it just grabbed that panel." "Where's the equipment he was using?" I asked. "His harness? The tether?" "OSHA took it all for the investigation, but they sent it back last week. It's in the evidence lockup at the main office." Back at the Miller and Sons headquarters, I used Sean's keys to get into the locked storage cage, where they kept sensitive materials and evidence from any on-site incidents. The box from OSHA was on a metal shelf, sealed with tape. I sliced it open. Inside was Sean's tool belt, his gloves, and the safety harness. I laid the harness out on a workbench. It was a standard-issue, high-quality rig, its bright yellow webbing scuffed with the dirt of honest work. I examined every inch of it, my engineer's eye searching for flaws. The buckles were solid, the stitching intact. Then I saw it. On the lanyard, the tether that connects the harness to the anchor point, there was a section near the carabiner that was frayed, the fibers worn through in a way that looked unnatural. A fall from that height wouldn't fray a cord. The force would snap it clean or not at all. This looked like it had been deliberately abraded, cut, sawed, or rubbed against something sharp over and over, weakening it from the inside out. It was subtle. To a casual observer, it would look like aggressive wear and tear. But I knew the tensile strength of these materials. This was sabotage. My blood ran cold. Someone had weakened the line. It wouldn't have snapped on its own, but it would have created just enough give, just enough slack at a critical moment to fail under a sudden shock load, like a man losing his balance. I took out my phone and photographed the frayed section from every angle, the macro lens revealing the severed fibers. This was my first piece of concrete evidence. My hypothesis was no longer monstrously unthinkable. It was terrifyingly plausible. But who? The list was short. It had to be someone who knew the site, who knew Sean's habits, and who had access to his gear. Someone who stood to gain from his death. My mind went back to what Rick had said about the bank being jittery. That was my next thread. I spent the rest of the day in Sean's office, not looking for insurance papers, but for financial records. Sean was meticulous. He kept a private ledger on his laptop, password protected. I tried his birthday, our mom's, the company's founding date, nothing. Then I tried Legacy 1955. The screen unlocked. I wasn't a forensic accountant, but I didn't have to be. The numbers told a dark story. Over the past year, there had been a series of large, unexplained payments to a subcontractor I'd never heard of, Creekview Development, LLC. The invoices were vague, citing consulting fees and expedited material costs. A quick search online revealed that Creekview Development was a shell corporation registered to a PO box, and the withdrawals corresponded perfectly with a growing debt crisis in the company that Sean was desperately trying to manage. Someone was bleeding Miller and Sons dry from the inside. Sean, with his sharp eye for detail, must have been getting close to the truth. His death wasn't just a convenience, it was a necessity for the thief. And there was only one person with the access and authority to cook the books this way: the head of operations, Rick. The numbers on Sean's laptop screen swam before my eyes. They were cold, impersonal figures, but they painted a portrait of pure greed. Creekview Development, LLC. The name was a bitter joke, a generic mask for a siphon, draining the lifeblood of our family's legacy. I spent the next 2 days cross-referencing every invoice, every payment authorization. The pattern was undeniable. Funds allocated for steel, for concrete, for specialized labor were being diverted, skimmed, and funneled into the ghost company. The project budgets were being slowly inflated to cover the theft, putting Miller and Sons on a razor's edge financially. My father, who had been handing more and more control over to Sean and Rick, would have never seen it from his semi-retired vantage point. Sean had been seeing it. His notes in the ledger were becoming more urgent, more pointed. Discrepancy in Q3 steel tonnage. Rick says supplier error. Need to verify. Follow up on Creekview consulting fee. Invoice seems thin. $150,000 payment to Creekview. Rick authorized. For what? The last entry was dated 2 days before his death. My brother had been on the verge of exposing him. He wasn't just an obstacle to Rick's ambition. He was the detective about to close the case. Murder had become Rick's exit strategy. I needed more than just a frayed rope and a suspicious ledger. I needed to connect Rick directly to Creekview. I dug into the Shell Corporation's registration documents online. It was a dead end, registered through an anonymous service in Delaware. But at the bottom of the digital paperwork, there was a filing fee paid by a corporate credit card. The last 4 digits were visible. My heart hammered against my ribs. I went back to the company's main server, using my father's administrative password. I pulled up the expense reports for senior management. I scrolled down to Rick's company card statements, and there it was. The last 4 digits matched. He hadn't even bothered to use a different card. It was arrogant. He never dreamed anyone, least of all me, the distant engineer, would ever dig this deep. I now had motive and means. The motive was massive. He was embezzling millions, and Sean was about to find out. The means was the sabotaged harness, an act that could only have been committed by someone with intimate knowledge of the site and the equipment. But I still didn't have the moment. I didn't have proof he was the one who tampered with the harness or was near Sean when he fell. The official report listed 12 people on that section of the site. Rick had told me himself. I was right there. He'd used it as part of his grieving cousin act, but it was a confession hiding in plain sight. I needed a human element. I needed someone who saw something. I thought about the crew. They were loyal to Sean, but they were also practical men with families to feed. Rick was their boss now. Speaking out against him would be career suicide at best. At worst, they could be afraid of him. Still, I had to try. I started with Jimmy, the young foreman. I met him for a beer at a dingy bar far from the construction site, a place where no one would know us. He was nervous, glancing at the door every time it opened. I just have a few questions about that day, Jimmy, I said, keeping my voice low. Off the record. I told the cops everything I know, Mr. Miller. It was a tragedy. Sean was meticulous about safety. You know that. Would he ever unclip his harness? Jimmy stared into his beer, refusing to meet my eyes. People make mistakes, even the best of us. And the wind? I pressed. You said the wind grabbed a panel, but the meteorological report for that day shows the wind speeds were moderate. Nothing unusual. He flinched. I had him. He knew the official story was flimsy. Look, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Rick's the boss now. He signs my paychecks. I've got a kid on the way. This isn't about paychecks, Jimmy. This is about my brother. This is about what's right. Did you see anything? Anything at all? He hesitated, his jaw working. For a moment, I thought he was going to break. But then the fear won. I didn't see anything, he said, his voice flat and final. He finished his beer in one long swallow and practically ran out of the bar. I was back to square one. I had a mountain of circumstantial evidence, enough to convince myself, but probably not enough to convince a jury. Rick was insulated by his position and by the fear he inspired. I felt a surge of despair, followed by a cold, hard resolve. If the system couldn't give me justice, I would have to find another way to corner him. I had the facts. Now I needed a confession. Patience was a virtue I had learned from blueprints and stress calculations, but it was wearing thin. Every time I saw Rick at my parents' house, playing the part of the supportive nephew while he was actively looting my family's company and had murdered my brother, a venomous rage boiled in my gut. I couldn't wait for a witness who might never come forward. It was time to force his hand. I chose my moment carefully. It was a Sunday evening. My father had asked Rick to come over to discuss the future of the company. A meeting I knew was just a formality before he handed the reins to the man he thought of as his second son. My mother was at her sister's house, unable to bear the business talk. It was just the three of us in my father's study, a room paneled with dark wood and filled with the ghosts of 3 generations of Miller men. My father, looking frail and defeated in his worn leather armchair, started the conversation. Rick, we appreciate everything you've done. Stepping up like this. Sean would have... He trailed off, his voice thick with emotion. Anything for the family, Uncle Joe, Rick said, his tone a perfect blend of humility and strength. We'll get through this. We'll finish the tower. For him. That was my cue. We need to talk about Creekview development, I said, my voice cutting through the somber atmosphere like a shard of glass. Rick's head snapped towards me. His mask of concern didn't slip, but a flicker of something cold and hard passed through his eyes. My father looked confused. What's Creekview? Dad asked. It's a shell corporation, I said, my gaze locked on Rick. A ghost company that's been receiving 6-figure payments from Miller & Sons for over a year for consulting fees. Funny thing is, the company credit card used to register it belongs to Rick. The silence in the room was absolute. My father stared at me, then at Rick, his expression a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. Rick's face, however, remained unnervingly calm. He even managed a small, sad chuckle. Leo, I know you're grieving, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. But you're not making any sense. You're stressed. You're looking for someone to blame. Am I? I stood up and tossed a folder onto the coffee table. It contained printouts of the doctored invoices, the shell company registration, and his credit card statement. Explain these. Explain the $1.5 million you've siphoned out of our company. My father picked up a sheet, his hand trembling. He looked at Rick, his eyes pleading for a denial, an explanation, anything. Rick's composure finally began to crack. A vein throbbed in his temple. This is insane. Those are legitimate subcontractor expenses. You're an engineer, Leo. You don't understand the books. They're expensive. You come waltzing back here after Sean's death and start throwing around these wild accusations. He turned to my father. Uncle Joe, he's out of his mind with grief. You can see that, right? The money is one thing, I said, my voice dangerously low. But that's not all, is it, Rick? Sean found out. His ledger is full of notes about Creekview. The last one was 2 days before he died. He was going to expose you. This is slander. Rick shot to his feet, his face flushed with anger. You have no proof. I have his harness, I said, letting the words hang in the air. The one from the evidence locker. The tether was frayed, weakened, not from a fall, but deliberately, by someone who knew it would fail under stress, someone who wanted his death to look like an accident. For the first time, I saw genuine fear in Rick's eyes. He had underestimated me. He thought I was just the quiet, bookish cousin. He never expected me to look so closely. My father made a choked sound, a gasp of pure pain. Rick, no, tell me he's wrong. Rick's fear quickly morphed back into rage. He pointed a shaking finger at me. He is wrong. This is what he's doing to you, Uncle Joe. He's trying to tear apart what's left of this family because he's jealous. He was always jealous of Sean, and now he's jealous of me. The accusation was so vile, so far from the truth, that it almost knocked the wind out of me. But I saw his strategy. He was turning it into my word against his, banking on my father's grief-addled judgment and his long-standing affection for him. And for a terrible moment, it almost worked. My father looked at me, his face a canvas of confusion and pain, as if he didn't know who to believe. Rick had poisoned the well. My evidence was circumstantial, and he was twisting my grief into a weapon against me. I had cornered him, but he was fighting his way out with lies, and he was tearing my father apart in the process. I had lost. I left my father's study that night, feeling utterly defeated. Rick had weathered the storm, turning my accusations into the ravings of a grief-stricken mind. My father was left shattered, caught between the nephew who had been a rock and the son who was making monstrous claims. I was isolated, and Rick was more entrenched than ever. I spent a sleepless night in Sean's old room, the evidence laid out on the floor like a grim puzzle with the most crucial piece missing. The financials, the frayed harness. It was a powerful narrative, but it lacked a witness. I had to go back to the crew. Jimmy had been a dead end, but there were 50 other men on that site. Someone had to have seen something. The next day, I didn't go to the main office. I went to a coffee shop near the tower site at 5:30 a.m., when the early shift guys were grabbing coffee before heading in. I sat in a corner, nursing a cup, and just watched them. I was looking for a face that didn't fit, someone who looked burdened. After an hour, I saw him, an older man, his face a roadmap of wrinkles from years of working in the sun and wind. His name was Sal. He'd been with Miller and Sons since my grandfather's time. He was a master iron worker, a legend on the crew, and fiercely loyal to my father and Sean. He sat alone, staring into his cup, his shoulders slumped. He looked like a man carrying a heavy secret. I walked over and sat down opposite him. Sal, it's Leo Miller. He looked up, startled. His eyes were haunted. Leo, I'm so sorry about your brother. He was a good kid, the best. Thanks, Sal. Can I ask you about the day he died? A shudder came down over his face. I told the OSHA fella everything, didn't see much. I was on the other side of the floor. His answer was too quick, too rehearsed. Sal, you've known my family for 40 years, I said, leaning in, keeping my voice low. You taught Sean how to read a blueprint when he was 10 years old. You know damn well he would never unclip his harness. You know it. So I'm asking you man to man, what did you see? He looked around the coffee shop, his anxiety palpable. People are listening, he whispered. Then let's go for a drive. We ended up in my car, parked by the bleak, choppy waters of Lake Erie. For a long time, Sal just stared out at the gray waves. "Rick's a snake," he finally said, his voice raspy. "Your dad never saw it, but Sean did. Sean was starting to ask questions about money, about some of the suppliers Rick was using." "What happened on the tower, Sal?" I pressed gently. He took a deep, shuddering breath. "I lied. I wasn't on the other side of the floor. I was maybe 30 yards away, checking a weld, just before the fall. I saw Rick go over to Sean's station. Sean was talking to one of the crane operators. Rick was fiddling with the safety line that was anchored to the column, the one Sean was about to clip into." My blood turned to ice. What was he doing? I thought it was odd. He had a tool in his hand, something small. He was messing with the lanyard near the clip. It only took a few seconds. Then he gave Sean a pat on the back and walked away. A minute later, Sean clipped in, stepped out to the edge to inspect a beam, and he was gone. It was the missing piece, the key that unlocked everything. "Why didn't you say anything, Sal?" I asked, my voice tight with a mix of fury and relief. His face crumpled. "Rick came to me that night, at my house. He knew I'd seen him. He told me he'd been checking the anchor point, making sure it was secure for Sean. He said if I suggested anything else, if I caused trouble for the family during this hard time, my pension would disappear. He said he'd make sure my son-in-law, who works for our biggest concrete supplier, lost his job. He threatened my family, Leo." The calculated cruelty of it was breathtaking. Rick hadn't just committed murder. He had meticulously planned his cover-up using fear and intimidation to ensure silence. "Sal, I need you to tell the police what you just told me," I said. He shook his head, his eyes wide with fear. "I can't. He'll destroy my family." "He destroyed mine," I countered, my voice hard as steel. "He killed my brother. He's robbing my father blind. And he's using your fear to get away with it. I have the financial records. I have the proof he was embezzling millions. Your testimony is the last piece. With you, we can put him away for the rest of his life. Without you, he walks, and everything Sean and my father and grandfather built will be his." I let the words sink in. I could see the war raging inside him, the war between fear and loyalty, between self-preservation and justice. He looked from me to the gray water and back again. "He thought Sean just fell," Sal whispered, more to himself than to me. "When Sean went over, Rick had this look on his face. Just for a second. It wasn't shock. It wasn't grief. It was satisfaction. That was it. The dam of his fear broke." "Okay," Sal said, his voice firming with resolve. "Okay, son. Let's go talk to the police." We didn't go to the local Harbor Creek police. Rick had a lot of friends on the force, guys he drank with, guys whose kids played on the same Little League teams. This needed to be handled by someone with no local allegiances. I drove Sal straight to the county sheriff's office and asked for the head of the detective bureau. Detective Miller, no relation, a strange coincidence, was a tall, weary-looking man with eyes that had seen it all. He listened to my story for 2 hours without interruption. He examined my photos of the frayed harness. He read through the financial documents I'd printed. Then he took Sal into another room. I sat in the hallway, the institutional green walls closing in on me, my leg bouncing with a nervous energy I couldn't control. This was it. Everything hinged on Sal holding his nerve, on his testimony being credible enough to reopen a case that had been officially closed as an accident. An hour later, Detective Miller emerged. "Mr. Miller," he said, his expression unreadable, "his story is compelling. Combined with your financial evidence, it gives us more than enough to act. But a good defense attorney will tear Sal's testimony apart, paint him as a disgruntled employee. We need more. We need Rick himself. What do you have in mind? I asked. Your cousin is arrogant, the detective said. He thinks he's gotten away with it. We're going to use that. We'll have Sal wear a wire. He's gotten away with it. He'll go to Rick, tell him he's having second thoughts, that his conscience is eating at him. He'll say he needs reassurance that his family will be safe. We just need Rick to incriminate himself. We need him to confirm the threat, to admit he was there, anything to corroborate Sal's story. The idea was terrifying. Sal wasn't an actor. He was an iron worker. Putting him in a room with a murderer and asking him to perform was a huge risk, but it was also our best shot. It took 2 days to set up. The detectives fitted Sal with a discreet digital recorder and coached him on what to say. The plan was for Sal to ask Rick to meet him at a neutral location, the same bar where I had first tried to talk to Jimmy. The sheriff's department would have plainclothes officers inside and a surveillance team outside. I wasn't allowed to be there, a fact that ate at me as I paced the floor of a hotel room the detectives had put me in for my own safety. I trusted Sal's courage, but I knew Rick was a cornered animal, and cornered animals are dangerously unpredictable. The hours ticked by. 7 o'clock, the time of the meeting, came and went. Then 8 o'clock. My mind spun with worst-case scenarios. Finally, at almost 9, my phone rang. It was Detective Miller. "We've got him, Leo," he said, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. "We have him cold." He told me what happened. Sal had played his part perfectly. He'd approached Rick with a story about having nightmares, about not being able to sleep. "I just need to hear it from you again, Rick." Sal's voice had quavered over the wire. "That I'm doing the right thing by staying quiet, that my family is safe." Rick, smelling weakness and wanting to reinforce his control, had taken the bait. "You're doing the smart thing, Sal," Rick's voice came through, smooth and menacing. "We had an agreement. You keep your mouth shut about what you think you saw, and your son-in-law keeps his job. Everybody's happy." "But what I saw," Sal pushed. "You were at his harness." There was a pause. Then Rick's voice dropped to a venomous whisper. Sean was going to ruin everything for all of us. He was a Boy Scout who didn't understand how the real world works. What I did to protect the company, to protect our jobs, his included. It was an accident waiting to happen. I just helped it along. Now, we are never going to speak of this again. Do you understand me? It was a full confession, wrapped in a threat. It was more than they could have hoped for. The moment Rick left the bar, the surveillance teams moved in. They arrested him in the parking lot. He didn't resist. The arrogance had finally been stripped away, leaving only the pathetic, greedy man underneath. The detective told me Rick was in custody, being charged with first-degree murder and multiple counts of felony embezzlement. The trap had closed. Justice for Sean was no longer just a desperate hope. It was a reality. The arrest sent a shockwave through Harbor Creek. The story was on the front page of the local paper and led the nightly news. Miller and Sons, heir accused of murdering cousin. The narrative was irresistible. A family dynasty, betrayal, greed, and a fall from grace, both literal and figurative. For my parents, the news was a second, more complicated kind of death. The loss of Sean had been a clean, sharp wound of pure grief. The betrayal by Rick was a creeping poison that infected every good memory they had of him. My father finally saw the snake he had welcomed into his home, and the realization broke him in a way Sean's death had not. He had not just lost a son, he had been blind to the monster who took him. The legal process was swift. Faced with Sal's testimony, the mountain of financial evidence, and the damning recording of his own voice, Rick's high-priced lawyer advised him to take a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and embezzlement to avoid a trial and a potential life sentence without parole. The judge gave him the maximum, 25 years to life. He would be an old man before he was even eligible for a parole hearing. He was punished. I sat in the courtroom for the sentencing, watching the man who had destroyed my family. He stood before the judge in an orange jumpsuit, his slicked back hair gone, his face pale and slack. He looked small, pathetic. He offered no apology, no remorse. He just stared straight ahead as his fate was sealed. There was no catharsis for me in that moment, no triumphant surge of vengeance. There was only a profound, hollow emptiness. Justice had been served, but it couldn't bring my brother back. In the months that followed, I stayed in Harbor Creek. I couldn't go back to my clean, orderly life in Cleveland. Miller and Sons was a wreck. The scandal had terrified our clients and creditors. The company my grandfather had built was on the verge of collapse. My father was too broken to lead. One day, I found him in his study, staring at an old black and white photograph of him, my grandfather, and a 10-year-old Sean standing on foundation of their first big project. "It's over, Leo," he said, his voice a ghost of what it once was. "We should just sell it for parts." "No," I said, the word coming out with a certainty that surprised even me. "No, we don't." Sean's last words to me echoed in my head. "You should come back, you know. We could use your big brain." He had been right. The family business wasn't just his legacy, it was mine too. Rick's evil couldn't be the final chapter in the Miller and Sons story. It was a long, hard road. I cashed in my savings and moved back into my childhood bedroom. I met with the bankers, showing them my plan to restructure, to streamline, to make the company solvent again. I met with every employee, from the foreman to the laborers. I told them the truth about Rick's crimes, and I promised them that the era of corruption was over. I promoted Sal to General Site Superintendent. His integrity became the new foundation we would build on. Slowly, painstakingly, we began to heal. We finished the Harbor Creek Tower. On the day of the dedication, I stood on the observation deck in the same spot where I had last seen my brother. The city spread out below, a testament to what could be built with hard work and an honest heart. My father was there beside me, looking more like his old self than he had in a year. "He would be so proud of you, Leo," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. His grip was strong again. I wasn't Sean. I would never have his easy charm or his love for the mud and the grit. But I was a Miller, and I had found my place not in the clean lines of a blueprint, but here, in the messy, complicated, and ultimately resilient world my brother had loved. The reckoning was complete. The antagonist was punished, but our victory wasn't in his downfall. It was in our survival. It was in the hum of the elevators in the tower behind us, a monument not to one man's ego, but to a legacy that refused to fall.